Between 2015 and 2020, I got paid to see 42 different countries for work. I got paid to travel. And I'm still in awe at myself and what I created with that business. It might make me cry. I created it all out of nothing. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jackie, and I help people find happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives through a balance between their mind, body, and soul. This is part 4 of my entrepreneur series. One of the questions that I am most asked on social media is, what do you do for work? How did you get into that for work? So if you're new here, I highly suggest going back to the beginning, starting with episode 1 of my entrepreneur series. Last week in episode 3, I left off with the work that I was doing in Miami, getting paid to drive Ferraris and Lamborghinis, be on yachts and brush shoulders with celebrities. And I explained how I built that business into traveling. End of 2014, I was invited on my first press trip. I got to go to the south of France to this beautiful villa, Les Loges, which is owned by Grey Goose, and I realized that I had an opportunity to shift my work into traveling. From the beginning of 2015 till around August, I built up a portfolio. I worked with a lot of local hotels, and by the end of August, I had packed all my things up. I had this opportunity to partner with travel brands, with hotels, tourism companies, airlines. Since I worked with Eurail, they sell tickets to all of the different train systems in Europe. And I had an opportunity to work with these people either in an exchange for marketing consulting or photography. In 2015, I went on my first trip. I worked with Eurail. I worked with a dozen or so hotels. I worked with a few tour companies, and I went from Paris to Belgium to the Netherlands. I went over to Slovenia, to Czech Republic, Czechia, I don't know what they are now, Croatia, Italy, and then back to Paris before coming home for the holidays. I was getting comped hotels, I was getting comped meals in most of the time, but I wasn't really getting paid, and I didn't like that. With my marketing background, what I did is I reached out to a few companies that I loved, and I let them know, like, hey, I love your product, I use your product, I see you're on social media, here's my photography portfolio, I'm going to these destinations, and I would love to take pictures of your product in these destinations. So on that first trip, I had a small handful of photography contracts, and that's what I ended up doing for the next 5 years or so. On that first trip, I didn't make a ton of money, but I was living. I was getting paid to live, and I also had no living expenses. I had no rent, I had no mortgage. I had to pay for like food and whatever I was doing, and a lot of times my food was being comped. I had worked it out that I didn't need a ton of money to make. I definitely wasn't making the money I was making in Miami, but I was getting paid in life, and I was really living, and I was getting to experience so many beautiful things. I came home for the holidays after that trip. I was high on life. I ended up working with Air New Zealand in early of 2016, and I went to Auckland, and then I went to Australia, and then I went to Bali for a month. I lived like an absolute queen in Bali. I think I spent only about $200 or $250 in the month that I was there. I was staying in the most beautiful hotels. I was often given some of like their best rooms, these gorgeous suites. I had such a good time there. And again, the same way as my first trip to Europe, I partnered with a few brands. I reached out to a few brands like, hey, I love your product. I'm going to this location, this location, this location. I'd love to take photos of your product in these locations. I had a few photography contracts in that time. I mentioned in the last video, the influencer thing wasn't really a thing, but it was starting to become a thing at the time. While I was on that trip in Bali, I had a press rep from Viking River Cruises reach out to me and offer me a press trip from Budapest to Amsterdam, a 2-week river cruise through Europe. And it wasn't paid. There was no pay on this trip, but they paid for my flights. They paid for the cruise. They also paid for me to have a +1. So my friend Deanne came with me. It was such a great trip, and everything was included all through Austria, through Germany. Such a beautiful trip. And that's when the work started to come in. Between 2016 and 2020, I was doing a handful of these photography contracts where I'm doing product photography in the destinations that I'm going to, or I'm doing marketing consulting. I was still doing also business consulting on the side. Again, we were on Skype, Zoom wasn't a thing yet. While I was traveling, I was still working with clients, and Then on top of that, now I'm traveling and I'm getting to experience all these beautiful places, all these beautiful countries, these gorgeous hotels. I've always had an affinity for luxury travel. So now I was getting paid to do what I loved. And it was just such a great time in my life. As my footing grew in the industry, so did my rates, so did my reputation. As I mentioned in the first video, you don't need to market yourself. When you do the job that you're paid to do and you do it well, people will refer you. If I was working with marketing companies or PR companies, they would rehire me on new contracts, and I got to work with some of the coolest companies. I worked with Delta Airlines. I'm a huge fan of Delta Airlines. I'm Delta loyal. I have all the credit cards to Delta. I'm a platinum Delta member. Shout out to Delta, the best airline that's out there. And I was promoting for them before I worked with them, and then they offered me a contract to work with them. I worked with KLM Airlines, which is partnered with Delta, but they're based in the Netherlands. I worked with SanDisk, which I'm a photographer. I use SanDisk. This is a company that I love. I got sponsored by Olympus cameras and I got paid to shoot photos for Olympus cameras. Visit Morocco. One of the best trips I've ever had was 2 weeks in Morocco with the tourism board for the country of Morocco. I helped to launch new cruise lines. I worked on some of the most fun campaigns that there was at that time. Had the opportunity to take my family members on some of these trips. My mom is forever the best plus one. In 2017, I got to go to Jamaica for a week with one of my cousins and my grandparents, and that trip was really special to me because my grandpa ended up passing away the next year. So having that time together was really special. This job that I had wasn't just a job. I was really living, and I was getting to experience life and getting to experience so much. I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I had there. Then in like mid 2018, this is now the age of the influencer starting, the work started to shift, and it wasn't becoming destination or product focused, it was becoming influencer focused. And I had contracts starting to request that I would be in the photos. Now, I'm a photographer, I'm not a model, so it wasn't something that I was super comfortable with, and I was still very insecure. I hadn't unpacked a lot of my emotional stuff there, so I didn't want to be in my pictures, and I started to really hate the work. Loved the traveling aspect of it, but the work started to become draining, and I started to really hate it. Now I'm on some of these trips with these people that are like the influencers in the wild. They were just like some of the most cringe people. I'm like, I did not resonate with the people. Don't get me wrong, I met some amazing people I'm still friends with today, but there were some people where I was just like, what am I doing here? This is not who I am. This is not what I'm about. It became really hard for me, but now I had a lot of my eggs in this basket, and that's one of the mistakes that I learned. I'm going to put a link in the description of this video to an article that I wrote on my blog about 13 lessons I learned in 13 years of entrepreneurship. But down the line, I'm going to do another video about the biggest mistakes I made in entrepreneurship. One of the biggest mistakes I made was putting a lot of my eggs in the travel basket. I was so excited about the work that I was doing that I just wanted to take on more and more of it. So I stopped doing less and less of the business consulting. Still working off referrals from my clients in Miami. Some of my clients only wanted to work with me. So if they needed a jet or a yacht or a car, they would call me no matter where I was in the world, and I would broker that deal. Started doing less of that. In retrospect, I really should have kept up with that work and not put so much of my time and effort into travel just because I was enjoying it at the time. You know, things shift. The idea of changing everything that I had set up for myself was really daunting. In the beginning of 2018 and 2019, I had no idea what the end of the year was going to look like for me. I was just working based off of the work that was presented to me. But in the beginning of 2020, I had the entire year planned out. So I had my whole year of contract. I had some time in there. July, August, September, I was just blocked out to be at home. And I was really going to work on shifting my focus back a little bit into the work that I wanted to do, and not taking the travel contracts because I needed the money, but taking the travel contracts because I wanted it. Early in 2020, I had a few trips to Arizona, and then I went to the Bahamas. And I got home from the Bahamas on March 9th, and then March 13th, everything closed. This was now COVID. And in the beginning, we were allegedly going to be closed for 2 weeks. So my contracts for the end of March and April started to get pushed back into May, into June. Some of them were getting pushed into July, so there goes that free time I had planned for myself. By the middle of April, it was like, this is done. Like, everything that I had built, I had a 6-figure year built up for myself, was gone. It was all gone. And at that time, even though I wasn't necessarily 100% resonating with the travel work, now I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? On a personal level, that is where I just fully surrendered to God. And I was like, I know that I've always been taken care of. I know that I've always been safe. I know that I've always been protected. I trust that even though this is scary right now, even though I just lost everything that I built over the last few years, I trust that this is where I'm meant to be. And I just gave it up to God. 2020 ended up being one of the greatest years of my life. And I know that that's hard to hear, because I know it was a negative year and a very difficult year for a lot of people. And don't get me wrong, there were some hardships. There were also some of the lowest points of my life were in 2020. But all in all, in retrospect, 2020 was the biggest shift that I've had as a person. It shifted the work that I was doing. It shifted the value I had in myself, the way that my trust and faith in God at that time then completely changed my life. It changed the work that I was doing. It changed my relationships. It changed everything. And I don't know that that would have happened, that shift could have happened without COVID and without that giant shaking up of my entire life. That's where I'm going to leave off today, and I will pick up next week about how I shifted my work during COVID, and I will also talk about some of my low points during COVID. My name is Jackie. I write articles and I make videos helping people find happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives to elevate their lives with a balance between their mind, body, and soul. You can find me on social media. I'm at Jackie is Alive on everything. On TikTok, I share some health hacks, some mental health hacks. I share a little bit about romanticizing your life and living a slower lifestyle, which has really helped me. On Instagram, I just share whatever I find beautiful. I love Instagram. It is a fun platform for me. So if it's something that I enjoyed, it's something that's beautiful, it's something that lights up my life, I share that on Instagram. On Twitter, I share a little bit of everything, shit posting, recipes to beautiful photos, threads on how to move through some energy. And on Pinterest and my website, I share more about some of the philosophies that I have, some of the ideologies that I have. I make new videos here every Monday and Friday, so you can start your week and end your week with a little bit of me. So don't forget to click subscribe, and I will see you next week.